We have a lot to cover. Lots to cover. Lots happened over the last 2 weeks. So we have 2 weeks to do it, to cover. So I wanted to kind of pull all of that together. I know I said I wanted to go more in depth. I'm going to want to go more in depth on days where there's less to cover, because I went through these things and there was quite a few things that I thought was important to cover, at least letting you guys know that the things happened, like McKinsey launching an open source ecosystem for digital and AI projects. You need to know about that. It's important. But there was a lot of other things that happened, like the Linux Foundation releasing a new project in conjunction with Docker and another company that I don't remember its name right off the top of my head. As well as some other things that happened. So there's a lot to cover, and we're going to cover it all. Russell, thank you. Yeah, I only stopped it and restarted it because I forgot to update the stream title. And if I didn't update the stream title before starting the stream, it doesn't reflect it if there's somebody that's going back and looking for it. Unless they know that my Sunday stream is the news, which they should. It's not a great reason. It's not a great reason, but it is the reason. I had a reason at least to do that. How's everybody doing?
I have TikTok.
All right. Yeah, it's. I should have remembered. I'm generally pretty good about doing it for the starting the stream, but I didn't. So, all right, let's get into it. We have a lot to go over. So we'll start with. We will start with security. There was actually quite a few things I wanted you to all be aware of in security that I think could impact the general one. So yeah. The first one is probably the least impactful. I know you usually start with most impactful, but it is the Akira ransomware threat. It's been going through a bunch of different things. So if if you're worried about ransomware, which you probably should be in 2023, you should probably keep your eye on this at this point. So it's looking at targeting a lot of Cisco products. So if you're running Cisco VPNs, you definitely want to be looking at this. It specifically is stating here without multi-factor authentication, so that might save you from this exploit. So definitely be looking at setting that up. The FBI have released this. 2 more ransom variants impact the same victims and data destruction trends. So this is another security thing. I'm going to post the chat. Here we go. Basically, more... the nice thing this comes with is mitigations for these attacks. So if you're looking at trying to understand how to better protect yourself, this has a document on mitigating ransomware. So I thought this was important for people to read over. I thought I read over it simply or quickly. It had really good. They're kind of basic, but they're good things to be doing if you're not doing them. Role-based security, least privilege, those types of things to be doing. All right, to get into the new, some of the new stuff, we have a new Trojan, Zenrat, and it masquerades as a Bitwarden password manager. I like Bitwarden. I have stated that before, so I thought this was important to put out there. Be on the lookout for a rat. Zenrat is not Bitwarden. If you guys do use Bitwarden, I would read through this as your password manager to try to make sure that you can identify it. Absolutely, Russell. I believe you are, and I agreed with this, but you are one of the people that stated that we would see. I thought people wouldn't risk security. That would be one place you wouldn't, tighten the belt. to say. Not that you wouldn't like make sure that you were all aligned, but security would be of the utmost importance. And maybe it gets cut, and it shouldn't. I believe McKinsey and Company would tell you to do the bare minimum for security. That's kind of in their repertoire. That's how they save money. The companies save money that way. That is not what I would recommend you. Thus, I'm not a good consultant. All right. This one is kind of terrifying. This is a CVAE that got a perfect 10. Now, this is unlike the Olympics. You don't want perfect 10s in your CVEs. And it's in the libwebp library. If you don't know who that affects, it affects you. Anybody on the internet that reads WebP, which is a lossless image, basically, and it gets a 10 out of 10 from all the reviewers. It's a lossless web format for browsers. So this affects not only Chrome, which then affects every other web browser except for Firefox, but it also affects Firefox. So basically, it allows arbitrary code execution from a well-formed WebP image loaded by your browser. This is actually kind of terrifying. This is probably one of the biggest deals I have seen in a while. Arbitrary code execution from a loaded image. It's amazing and terrifying. It's amazing. Like, I wanted to show you, like, I don't know that there's anything I can tell you to do right now. There's no mitigations other than update your browser as soon as they have an update with the fix in place, because that's the only thing you can do right now. And it is actually fairly terrifying thinking that somebody could post a WebP image that your browser automatically loads and executes arbitrary code on your machine. Right. This image right here could be an infected image telling you about it. That could be there. Absolutely. Russell, this is why it's terrifying. This is why it's terrifying. Now you're scaring me, Russell. I you know what? Sometimes I think it's best to not think too much about them. All right. A really interesting article on security. Actually, Russell, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. The ad blocker is another common way people attack people on the web, and is actually part of the FBI's and CISC. I forgot their acronym. It's too long. Only 3 letters should be for government agencies. Anyways, they literally stated that you should have a web or a ad blocker, because that's how some cyber criminals are getting you to click on their link, is by advertising and making it the top link for what you search for. The CISA, that's what it is. Yeah. Yep. They agree with you. Which, I feel like it's a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of content out there that I appreciate that I don't have to pay for, because they pay for it with ads, and I respect that. And so I try not to ad block those. Now, I also chronically don't click on any of them, so I don't think they get paid from me anyways. But how government agencies agreeing with Russell is terrifying. It's a conspiracy, I believe. I believe there's a new conspiracy theory out there now. All right. So this Cloudflare, using Cloudflare to bypass Cloudflare, is a really interesting article. Did I post it? I did not. I'm going to post it. Is a really interesting article that I personally love to read, because I've been thinking about, building cloud, building a new cloud. And this is something that we piddle around with on stream, and I write some code for doing. And one of this attack basically requires a person to sign up for a Cloudflare account and leverages that there's some shared hardware for IP addressing. And it allows you to bypass Cloudflare's DDoS protection, leveraging Cloudflare. It's a very interesting attack vector that I had never thought about. Now, I don't think that this hits a lot of people because a lot of people aren't making a cloud. But if anybody's trying to make a application as a service that really is more of a cloud-based infrastructure means, I think this is an important lesson to learn. Microsoft is warning of cyber attacks attempting to breach cloud via SQL Server instances. Now, this is Microsoft SQL Server instances, and they're trying to do basically a cross account attacks to basically leverage your cloud. So, cloud services like Azure identities for allocating identities to various cloud resources. These identities are used for authentication to other cloud services. So basically, they're trying to do an account takeover using this. Microsoft did say that there has been no actual reported successful account takeovers, but you don't want to be the first successful account takeover. So yeah, that is a thing that's out there. Would people be affected if they use the shared hosting model that I think Amazon offer for cheaper hosting? This is actually effectively what the Cloudflare thing comes down to, is the shared hosting, which the Null Cloud is going to be initially all shared. I would love for us to then work out how to do like dedicated. And what it comes down to is Cloudflare has a piece that is always shared. And that's the piece that they're leveraging. So a lot of the times with the cloud providers, you can pay for dedicated, like a full stack dedicated. I believe AWS allows you to pay for dedicated VPCs and everything. So basically from the outside in, which is why I actually brought it up when they released their dedicated stuff, is because it means basically you get no shared resources. Yes, Russell. Now, it is way cheaper for infrastructure providers to share. And a lot of the reasons is just efficiencies of, I don't even want to say scale, but it's efficiency of use. If you have a dedicated machine that you get, whether you use 5% of it or 100% of it, that's whatever. But if you're only using 5% of it and I can put a bunch of other people on it, there's a lot of efficiencies that go with that. Right. It makes sense to share, but the Cloudflare type of exploit is the risk. Not risk 5. That's right. That's 100% right. Like, that's why you pay for the extra dedicated stuff. It's a security thing. Absolutely. There's even more than just the Cloudflare. There's more than just the Cloudflare, because if you think about it, there's also like data locality. Is your database on a shared machine that has other people's workloads running on it? Is your data on a disk that is, maybe logically partitioned, but if somebody got access to that machine as a whole, would they have access to it if they broke the hypervisor or whatever is partitioning it? The same goes with your network security and the things like that. Obviously, there's things in place to protect you from that. And I'm not saying that shared systems are inherently just broken. They're just less secure because they're actually sharing all of those things, from memory to CPU. This is why I brought up the new stuff with the AMD CPUs, where it's encrypted down to the CPU, because up until this year, shared CPU meant that your workload was running through the same CPU pipelines that everyone else's CPU was, without encryption. Now, with the new encrypted stuff within Google and AWS, and believe Azure has released it. Hello, Jubril. How are you doing? Without that, it is unencrypted going through the CPU. And so that's a pretty big deal. A pretty big deal. Did my stream die? All right. I think it's back. I think it's okay. So anyways, yeah, that's what all of these things are doing, like the AMD 64 stuff, where they're doing the encryption on the CPU workloads, is to make shared workloads more secure. I think it was my internet, Russell. My internet kind of sucks. It kind of sucks. My bad. All right. Let's move on. We have so much insecurity to talk about. Sorry, these are only the things in security I thought might affect you all. And this is another really bad one. The Looney Tunables, local privilege escalation in glibc. So if you're talking about Linux, there are very few Linux distributions without the GNU C libraries that dynamic loading. So if you're running on Linux, there's a high chance that this affects you. Now, if you're running on one like Arch, hopefully it gets patched and the rolling update gets out there to you soon. And really, there's nothing more than I can say than to basically, keep your machines up to date. This is why. I love the name of this one. Yeah, this one is good too. Looney Tunables is fantastic name of the attack, but Arch slug mode engage. I can't really take credit of it. I've only run Arch for like 3 months. I think I run Arch poorly for 3 months at that. But yes. Anyways, it's definitely of concern. And the big deal here is Ubuntu and Debian are huge ones to run on server. Honestly, Arch isn't run on server for a reason. Like, it's not designed for server. I mean, I guess there are server workloads for it, but these are huge workhorses of the enterprise running. So even more so than just your local workload, your local machine, which isn't really exposed to the public internet. These are affected machines that are exposed to the public internet. So definitely to be on the lookout for. I do wonder about Amazon Linux. So this I do not think is a exhaustive list. They did note that Alpine Linux remains an exception due to its use of a different library instead of glibc. But this vulnerability was introduced in 2021, so a little while ago. So it's been out there for a little while. I wonder if I did not see any active exploits of it at this point, but that doesn't mean that there's not. ShellTorch, I believe this one was brought to us by the community. So thank you for posting those. Yes, it was. I was just validating. Sorry. This was brought to us by the community. I wanted to shout out to the community for keeping the community up to date with things that are happening. I know that we've actually used PyTorch ourselves on stream a little bit and is kind of my go-to easy to use machine learning toolkit. ShellTorch, by researchers, these PyTorch vulnerabilities are troubling for artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning community. All right. So basically, a research team has unveiled a series. This isn't just one, but a series of vulnerabilities within the PyTorch model server. Now, this is particularly troubling because this is Torch Serve. Basically, this is how you serve your model. Because a lot of you would think, oh, well, my training is kind of behind a firewall, doesn't happen, whatever, blah blah blah, and you would be right. But this is actually how you serve your models. If you serve them directly to the internet, probably shouldn't do that. But if you did, this would be a direct attack vector. So anyways, this is something to keep in mind. If you are using PyTorch, PyServe, I would recommend you check it out. I know we do some of that on this community. So there is the linky to that. Torch at your own discretion. That's all I can say. Now, I do believe I missed a link. I missed a link from the community. I'm pulling it up right now so that as to not have a community member left out in the dark, because I appreciate every single one. This is one I have not gotten a lot of time to review. Is this one. Legions of critical infrastructure devices subject to cyber targeting. Now, I think the astronomically terrifying thing of this is that these devices are found open on the public internet. This is something I don't even do. I have Raspberry Pis and other things that control my house that are 100% not on the public internet. That's like your first group, your first line of defense is air gapped. Now, obviously, we've seen attacks that bypass air gap through even one that does power supply LED light. And there's even one where the memory, we were watching one where there was, I forget whether it was the radio waves or the heat signature of memory that they were using. But your first line of defense is just not to have these on the internet. Don't give them a public IP address. Shutting down the power in winter would be deadly for some. I can tell you that we lost not power, just heat. And our upstairs reached less than 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And for all of you living in non-freedom loving countries, that is well below zero. I don't know exactly what -15 is, but I'm going to guess that it's around -20, 25 degrees Celsius in a matter of hours. So it can get cold. And shutting down power, it causes roadblocks and whatnot. I do believe the next major war will be fought around things like this. This is what will be targeted because of just the sheer chaos. If you could shut down all the traffic lights, now for those of you living in Great Britain with your roundabouts, you won't be as affected by this. But for us in America, we love our traffic lights, and traffic would come to a standstill, clogging our interstates and whatnot. So, yep, this would be horrible. And I just have one comment is, please, for the love of everything good, don't expose it to the internet if it doesn't need to be exposed to the internet. Now, I told you 2 weeks ago that we had a special Google Kills section, and it was just going to be there for 1 week. But it turns out 2 weeks later, we have to revisit the Google Kills list. So not only have they killed a lot of stuff, but it seems like they are just on a roll of killing things that people actually use. From Google domains earlier this year to now Google Podcasts will die in 2024. These are not, prior to 2024, Google killed a bunch of things that people didn't really use or not use heavily. They had small groups of people that really used them. And, but it wasn't their bigger projects. Now with Google domains and Google Podcasts, I have been directly affected twice, but it doesn't stop at Google Podcasts. We also have Jamboard. I'm not personally a person that have used Google Jamboard, but Google Jamboard is something used in schools, and it is now coming end of life. I believe Google is working very hard to tarnish its image, its image. It's working very hard. And there is one more thing. We're moving into the cloud news with this. I know we started with Google Kills, but this is related to Google Cloud. Now, AWS and Azure, for all their faults, have done one thing though. They have only lowered prices so far. That being said, Google GCP has raised prices twice. Now, usually their price ranges are kind of hidden in adding extra complexity to billing. And they say most of the time you could save money, but if you continued using the thing as you had been using or how most people use, it would be a much larger cost increase. So they actually incur engineering time to actually get you to use the same cost. You have to re-engineer stuff. And a big cost increase is coming hidden in a policy change, which is even worse. So you'll notice something here. I saw this on Twitter, and some people said big picture change to valuable GCP security feature for least privilege IAM. So basically, there was apology intelligence release notes that are basically saying that some of the security features you wanted now require a much bigger, much more expensive subscription and aren't even available in the pay as you go. Now, this is hidden well deep inside of this policy change here, and it's not evident unless if you're really digging for it. Yeah, Google is actually hurting its reputation with developers, from Stradia to podcasts to even things like GCP. I do think that they're making people ask themselves a second time before they depend on something. I'm not saying Gmail is going to go anywhere. I'm not even saying GCP is just going to be shut down one of these days. But you now have to ask yourselves twice if you're actually going to depend on Google Docs or not. I think those are pretty safe. I think they're pretty safe. But you kind of never know at this point. You kind of never know. So anyways, if you're on GCP, I think this is a pretty big deal. You're going to have a pretty big bill coming. Yes, hiding security behind paywalls is a horrible thing. I actually stand by this, is that I think that if a car is capable of a security feature, like, any type of security feature, it shouldn't be allowed to be paid for. If it has the hardware, if it has the ability to do it, it should be required to do it. I don't think, and maybe not a law, but as a company, you shouldn't hide things behind a paywall. Now, obviously, stuff like a WAF, a web application firewall, has a cost. It has a cost. So I'm fine with them charging for it as a pay by you go, but paywalling it to a very expensive enterprise account, I don't think is acceptable. Anyways, I just wanted to bring this up because it's not evident. It's kind of hidden in this announcement with, some policy intelligence feature will only be available for customers with an organization level activation of Security Command Center, which is basically this really expensive prepaid thing that you have and you have to get onto. And then you can, once you pay for this, you have pay as you go for the feature. And one of the big things is basically least privilege IAM that they're hiding that in. So you're not going to be able to be as secure. And it wasn't evident. I didn't even notice it until I started seeing people speak out about it. So good on other people. I'm just reporting it. I'm not the one that found it. Now, as much as I like to call those things out for you guys, they did have some performance with the latest forecasting updates in Vertex AI. So if you have been using GCP for forecasting, the Vertex AI has a 10x improvement, which is a pretty big deal. So that was about it. I did want to post this. This is their pricing that you can get. It amazes me at how popular GCP is. I think what if I had to look at it, what GCP did really well and what I would give them credit for is they really got in with the developers. There was a lot of developers that really loved using GCP, and I think that they did that really well. They made it easy for a developer to reason about and use and think about, whereas AWS has had a crappy UI from day one, and then every single time they change it, it's after you've learned the old crappy UI. They make another crappy UI that you have to relearn, and it's annoying because they never make it better. And they actually have made it much better since when I first used it in like 2014, it was the worst. But I think GCP did that really well. They met developers and made it easy. All right. Amazon Bedrock is now generally available. So we've talked about some of the stuff in Amazon Bedrock. Yeah, AWS's dashboard is way better than when we first used it, 100%. AWS has come a long way since 2014. It was rough. So with the general release, I know we've been tracking Amazon Bedrock a little bit. They have released some new stuff with it as well. So they have maintained a consistent user experience. This is what I was looking for. Amazon Bedrock has achieved HIPAA eligibility and GDPR compliance. So with this, you're able to use it in more compliant ways throughout. And they have increased the regions, although it's still only in North Virginia and Oregon. It was just in North Virginia, so it's still pretty limited, but yeah. And we'll just cover one more thing, and then we're going to take a little break as ads will start in just a second. AWS Backup announced support for Amazon Aurora continuous backup. So basically, if you're using Aurora, you can get continuous backup, allowing very point in time restore. So if you're wanting to like go back in time, it's a very powerful tool that you can use. All right, for all of you who can see me through ads, we should do something in these ad breaks for the news. I hate to cover more news because, that feels like disingenuous. So we're pausing. There was nothing I could do about the ad break. My apologies. Actually, I get 3 snoozes. I don't know what this button is. I get 3 snoozes per stream. Next ad break for the news, I'm going to try out the snooze. I don't know how long it snoozes them. I don't know. That sounds good. Go back to stretches. Get up. Walk around for a little bit. That's actually perfect. We have 2 minutes left. I'm going to get up, walk around, and we'll be right back. I said I was going to get up and go walk around, but I don't. It's 2 minutes. And then I have to figure out something to do with. I need a be right back screen. Like I need like just a thing to press to be right back. That's what I need. There's so much stuff I need to do for this stream. All right, we have more in cloud news. There's actually quite a bit in cloud news left. We have stuff from Docker, from DigitalOcean. We have stuff from Cloudflare, not just the security stuff. I kind of made a section for GitHub because they have some stuff. Yeah, they have some stuff. And then we're going to jump into open source, where we have a lot of stuff to talk about. A lot of interesting random stuff that happened over the last 2 weeks. That I think is pretty interesting, including something that I think we need to make a video on, because I think people are confused about the difference between Open Pub Key and SigStore. I actually think people are confused about what they are, and I might make a video on it. But we had a lot of stuff releasing on that, and we have a bunch of stuff on AI, ML. I say a bunch of stuff, just 4 things. 4 interesting things. So All right, we have 15 seconds left. Talk bad about all those people who haven't subscribed. That's what we do in these ad breaks. I'm just joking. I am very much just joking. All right, we're back. Thanks for taking a quick break with me. All right. Docker. DockerCon happened, and DockerCon Live. It was a live conference in 2023. And they had some stuff going on that was pretty interesting. So a few years back, 2019, Docker actually sold off its enterprise part, and it's kind of doubled down on focusing on developer experience. And we kind of see that building secure software from the start. So they had a bunch of stuff released. Docker Scout is one of them, one of those things now. Basically a security scanning piece of software, something to compete, you could think of with something like Sneak, because I believe Docker used to use Sneak in Docker Hub first, and now they've moved to their own thing, Docker Scout. That's what I'll do the next ad break. I do need a be right back something. We'll have to try that in an AI model for sure. So if you're looking to secure your containers a little bit better from the start, there's Docker Scout. On top of that, they have done several things for what they call the inner loop, basically the developer experience. You can think of these things as projects like Tilt that they bought. But they have done a lot of other things. In WSL and Docker Mac, they have improved startup performance by over 75%, which is pretty staggering. So if you're using something that's not the optimal OS like Windows or Mac, you should be seeing a much better experience, a much faster experience. Accelerating network performance as well with Mac is amazing. This is amazingly better. And then optimizing host file sharing performance. Again, they did quite a few things. We're not going to go through all of these things, but they made the developer experience for Docker Desktop much better. Now, I don't use Docker Desktop, so this doesn't really affect me because I am on the optimal OS. But for those of you who are using Docker Desktop, there should be quite a bit of performance upgrades. Now, there were other things than just performance. There was Compose Watch and Resource Saver and Docker Engine that was released. So if you're really interested in those, it's a pretty cool thing. So Docker Compose Watch is probably the biggest thing that I saw that I think developers could use, especially if you're big on Docker Compose. Docker Compose is pretty interesting. I personally don't use it a whole lot, but it's pretty interesting. So this is a tool that you can use with Docker Compose. Basically, Docker Compose Watch basically is kind of the Tilt of Docker Compose. So Tilt provides this hot reloading of stuff, and that's what I've used or seen. I haven't actually used Watch to do this, but that's what I've seen Watch be able to do, is like this hot reloading of stuff. So basically you'll see them do this watch here where there's like a path and a target. And basically that's going to reload this, do a hot reload of this in Docker Compose. So you can kind of think of it as Tilt. And if you don't know what Tilt is, you should watch my live stream. We use Tilt all the time. So these are pretty cool. So if you're using Docker Desktop, using Docker Compose, pretty awesome stuff happening there. Let's talk about DigitalOcean. Once the web's darling for favorite cloud hosting service, after a series of missteps, they've kind of lost as much of that shine as they used to have, but a lot of people still use DigitalOcean, and that failed quickly. Let's just get that out of the way. I kind of zoomed up way too much, but introducing DigitalOcean managed Kafka. Now, I don't think that this solves the problem of Kafka for a lot of people. It's really nice, and I love that they have a managed solution. but you still have to configure it. You still have to connect services. I wish there was a cloud provider that would just make it so that your services could talk together via a message, an event stream, some might say. But that has yet to come. And until that does, these managed services are going to be awesome. So if you're in DigitalOcean and you've wanted to use Kafka or are still using it, you might want to check their managed Kafka. Usually it's more expensive, but there's some interesting takes they take on this. A simple all-inclusive fixed pricing starts at $147 a month. Basically, very predictable. Now, the only thing that isn't on this, that's just for the management control plane. That's not for the storage. They charge the block storage off to the side of that. And so that depends on how much you use of it. But that's actually pretty good for a highly available Kafka. So yeah. That sounds good to be true. What cloud would innovate? I know what cloud would bring that type of innovation. None so far, but you know what? I believe there's people working on it, although they're not very fast at it and are behind schedule for sure. Now that's all the DigitalOcean news. They're much smaller. They have less news covering, but Cloudflare did bring us some things that might be interesting to people. So let's cover that next. Cloudflare. I don't know why I said Cloudflare, but Cloudflare, that should be a, you know how they name attacks? The next time Cloudflare has a security vulnerability, it should be named Cloudflare. You don't even have to credit me with that. You can take it. I just want it to happen. Cloudflare is partnering with Hugging Face to make deploying AI easier and more affordable than ever. So this is actually just making it really easy to deploy the Hugging Face. Hugging Face has a lot of open source stuff, but it can be kind of hard to deploy. They're partnering with them to basically provide it as a service for you. So if you're already on Cloudflare, want to leverage some of the Hugging Face stuff, it's there for you. Sippy is released. This is a new open source project released by Cloudflare. Now, I think this is a pretty cool tool, and I would love to see it implemented to support other people. But right now, it's just S3 to R2. Now, Cloudflare released R2, which is a very predictable S3 competitor that has no egress fees. So people can use it as much as they like, which could save you money. Now, R2 has other types of fees, and I think if you don't have a ton of egress, it's actually maybe slightly more expensive, although it seemed pretty cheap the last time I looked at it. I don't personally use R2, but it seems like a pretty good competitor to something like S3. What Sippy does is it allows you to dynamically access it. It's basically, think of it as a cache. Basically, what you do is people access this thing through Sippy, your S3 or R2. And what it does is if it's not in R2, if the file's not in R2, it goes to S3, gets the file, puts it in R2. And this means that instead of transferring everything from S3 to R2 and paying huge egress fees in 1 month, you slowly do it over time. You slowly get those files, get those resources, and bring them into R2. Now, I haven't used Sippy yet, but it seems pretty cool. And yeah, if you're looking at using R2, it looks like a valuable tool. Hyperdrive, making databases feel like they're global. Now, this works with every database you have out there, no matter what provider it is. It sounds like magic because if you look at their timing here, they say stuff like 20, 21 times faster. Now, the real secret here is they just use a private network. That's it. What they do is they use their edge network to ingress the database for your traffic, and they private network it to as close to they can to that database. And those private networks are very fast, very fast. So it's a little bit cheating. You're paying for a private network. That's what you're doing. But they make it very fast and they make it pretty easy. So Hyperdrive basically makes it very easy for you to use this in front of a Postgres database. That's what they're doing. This is for your Postgres databases, and they make it very fast for Postgres. You put Hyper in front of it, and basically what Hyper is going to do is onboard it as close to, instead of having a globally distributed database, they onboard that traffic into their private network at the soonest possible point, and they wire that straight to the database. Now, these, I'm sure, anytime you see a company do this, they find the best cases for them. So if most of your people access your database from North Virginia, this is probably not going to help you that much, honestly. But the likelihood that most of your people use your database from North Virginia, where your database is probably not true. The other thing is that a lot of the times your apps are the things that talk to your database. And if your apps are at your database, then it also doesn't really make sense. So it really depends on what you're doing with your database. But this is also pretty cool, so I wanted to shout it out. Right, Russell. That is what I'm trying to point out, is where the control test being run on a server in another continent, 800 milliseconds versus 41. I'm trying to balance this with, like, it is pretty cool, and I wanted to show people what it is, but at the same time, it all depends on how you use your database, how you're set up, where your users are even at, and whatnot. I think that there's edge cases where maybe you don't have a distributed database and you have people in Europe that use your North Virginia database. And maybe then it 100% is way better. 100%. But I try to balance all things with, it depends in software engineering. That's what makes software engineering fun and difficult, is there is no silver bullet to anything. And it always depends on what your needs are. That's what I love. It's also why I don't come out with these super opinionated things like some YouTubers do, is because I really try to pose it depends. This is awesome if it fits your case, it fits your needs. All right, let's move on to GitHub. GitHub had some things that it released. Okay, fun and sometimes really painful if it's late at night on a weekend. How GitHub uses GitHub Actions and Actions Larger Runner to build and test GitHub.com. This is a classical example of dogfooding. If you guys are wanting to learn to run tests and things like that, this is a great place to start. It wasn't as in-depth as I was hoping, but if you're looking at GitHub Actions and wanting to know, they have some examples, not enough that it makes me feel good. Like I said, I wish that they would have gone into more detail in some things, but it's actually really good to know as well. GitHub uses GitHub Actions completely from start to finish. So if you want to sit there and say that GitHub Actions don't work because they don't work for a distributed application, that's probably not true. That's probably not true. Now, I'm not saying GitHub Actions is the end-all be-all for actions, because there are pain points in it that clearly Russell and I have talked to at no end. But it's good to see. It's good to see. And it's a good read, too, if you're trying to solve some of the same problems. How do you share workloads and things like that? They talk, at least at a high level, to give you the idea about it. This is also something I think that everybody should read. This is something that I think large companies have failed to. Before the pandemic, many companies were in person and they never tried to do fully remote because they didn't need to. Now, a lot of companies are struggling to do full remote. At least as far as we can tell, they're struggling to. Whether they actually struggle to or just don't know any better, we don't really know. But none of that really matters. What I loved about this article right here is it kind of went into how they operate slightly different as a fully remote company. GitHub has been fully remote from the get-go. And it goes into things like how we communicate and how we do stuff. I'm not saying that this is an end all be all for everybody's experience, but it is a good starting point. Every team should be different. Every company should be different, and they don't have to follow this. But if your guys are trying to do a remote workplace, I think there is a valuable learning experience in this short blog article. There's a lot of guidelines, a lot of high-level things that get you thinking on it. I'm not saying that I'm going to look to adopt everything that they have put here, but I think that it's really actually, I thought that this would be a great article to read with you guys after I had read all of it. I was like, oh, I'd love to actually talk about those things. So if you guys would like to talk about this, I would love to, because I think it would be interesting. I'm thinking about making a YouTube video on it, to be honest. I have comments on some of my experiences. I've worked remote since before the pandemic, and I think it's interesting. All right, so if you're using GitHub Actions like we've talked about, Apple Silicon powered M1 Macs, they have a new larger runner for these. So if you're looking to really, you have something that has too much latency or something like that, then there with the smaller runners you can get timeouts and things like that as well that are just a pain. So they have larger runners for M1s now, so go be free, test your larger things. There is new stuff added for scanning of secrets. So we've had secret scanning for a while, but this adds better checks for major cloud services. So basically, it's just providing better scanning for secrets for things like AWS, Microsoft, Google, and Slack to try to keep your tokens out of your code. And so that's actually pretty awesome. A lot of these things you can just automatically enable if you're an open source project. So yeah, just do it. Just do it. Nike, please don't sue me, but just do it. Russell, your 2020 experience doesn't count. Okay? It doesn't count. Not all experiences count. Okay. All right, let's talk about machine learning. Sorry for the awkward pause. I was just regaining my thoughts. I had to go over the tabs, think about what we had. All right, so I have been in a quest to run my own ML for our Twitch events. We'll get YouTube events in there sometime, but right now it's just Twitch events. And so I've been keeping my eye out. Right now, Llama seems like the best thing, but it is still hard to run locally. That being said, there is a Mistral AI that outperforms Llama 2 at 13 billion. It's a 7 billion parameter model. Now, I say this. I think how it outperforms is very vague at this point. We don't have a good, this is why we do the AI games in the first place, is because there's not a good way of actually judging these things at the tasks. And a lot of them is like, oh, this task that we did. But you could literally train your model to do that specific task. It's like when schools train kids to pass tests instead of actually learning. I feel like that's what we get into some with this. But supposedly it outperforms Llama 2 on 13 billion and Llama 1 on 34 billion. It approaches the Code Llama 7 billion performance on code while remaining good at English tasks. And it can run on a Raspberry Pi. Now, I don't know if it runs well on a Raspberry Pi, but I've heard that they've run it on a Raspberry Pi. So, and the new Raspberry Pi 5 came out, which isn't even in the news because it didn't even make it there. But the Raspberry Pi 5 did come out, which is interesting at the least. So I'm interested in seeing this. Stability AI's 3 billion is another open source LLM for mobile devices. So a 3 billion parameter came out from Stability AI that is supposedly able to run on, I don't have my phone on me, I lose it occasionally. That is supposed to run on phones and provide a very easy, very lightweight ability to run this. So this is another one that's out there. I don't know how well it does. Yes, the Pi 5 is out. Well, soon to be out, releasing. It was announced. I'll have to get my hands on one. So, I will have a Raspberry Pi by 2028, I think, is probably when I'll be able to find one to buy. Another big announcement for the machine learning group. If you're interested, Canonical releases Charmed MLflow. If you don't know what Canonical's Charmed libraries and stuff are, it's basically infrastructure as code in the canonical way. not the canonical way as in anyways, you guys, it was a play on words. Anyways, besides bad dad jokes, Charmed MLflow is out there. So basically it's, if you're using Charmed and you want to use MLflow, they have I hate to say the word playbook because then people think of Ansible, but they have a Charmed playbook now for MLflow, which is pretty nice. Although MLflow has always been the easy one to run, so I don't know. Now, there is claiming that a new technique based on 18th century math. So I don't think it's really that new. I think it's a couple hundred years old, but a new technique based on really old math actually outperforms machine learning. And basically, it's something I have said for a while, is that our machine learning currently kind of takes the shotgun approach of deep learning, and it doesn't really work to understand the problem, but just take a very general approach to try to understand the problem. And some researchers are now concluding that the things that I have been saying for a while are in fact true, even though I only based them on logic. They based it on research, which is probably a little bit better than my logical thinking. And saying that actually using math to solve the problems that we need, we can actually obtain better results mathematically than some of the shotgun approaching, which I'm interested into seeing how this actually works into the frameworks. Right now, it's more mathematical and just a high level component, but it's definitely interesting because I think this will actually shape things like PyTorch and TensorFlow and those types of things in bringing better frameworks for us to use. All right. We're on to open source. Did anybody else see anything about AI/ML? I know I didn't give it. We had so much to talk about. So much happened in the last 2 weeks. It was mind-boggling. That's right. I'm going to save the best for last here. We have a new release of Rust. We have stuff from the Linux Foundation that we're going to talk about. We have a release of Pipewire that came out that I'm excited about. I currently use Pipewire because it allows me to route my sound better, gives me more control. We actually have a lot to talk about in open source. So probably the most important thing in open source to happen to open source is McKinsey launching an open source ecosystem. This is probably the thing that's going to revolutionize and save open source, is for quite possibly the worst thing to happen to businesses coming to open source. Let's move on because I don't think that I can, I don't think I can sell this any longer. I don't know. How did I do? On a serious note, McKinsey did make an open source ecosystem. The first thing that they did was their Visro is what I'm going to pronounce it as, which is basically an open source project to visualize your AI models. Haven't used it, don't know how well it works. Maybe it's the best thing since Swiss cheese. I don't know. The other thing that they're looking to launch is the Causal Next, which is a tool for Causal Next. I'm sorry, a tool for building cause and effect models. And they're looking to bring that in, but it's been around for a little while. So I don't know. You know what? You can act. You know what? I will give you this in case anybody wants to dip their toes into corporate open source. This is as corporate open source as it gets from McKinsey. You won't find any better. That being said, OpenSUSE slow roll. This is something I talked about, and I need to get Richard on to talk. That is something I'm working on, is revamping how we do some of this, and I'm looking to at least once a month get a co-speaker on to talk about some of the open source stuff out there. I know people in both the OpenSUSE, Red Hat, and Kubernetes ecosystems, so I would love to bring them on to talk about some of these things. So yeah, let's talk about like open source slow or OpenSUSE slow rule. That is harder to say than it seems. So OpenSUSE slow roll is basically kind of Leap and Tumbleweed having a child. That's the best I can. Leap is kind of their release every once in a while and have a long-term support. And Tumbleweed is kind of their move fast and break things fast and often and painfully. And so they're kind of merging those two, merging their efforts into one thing where it slows Tumbleweed down. It doesn't move as fast, but it's not also Leap, which sometimes would take years before a new big release came from. Leap 15 to 15.1 took a long time. So I'm interested in seeing this. I'm actually really interested in getting Richard's thoughts on this. And so I am very much excited to try to get him on. I haven't heard back from him just yet, as I have been busy myself. But hopefully I can get him or at least somebody else to get on here and talk about it. All right. This does not work with Dark Theme, but OpenTelemetry native traces metrics logs in a single pane. So if you've been paying too much for Datadog, you've been paying too much for Datadog, Signos is a new open source project that's looking to compete with it. So if you're like, well, what license is it under? Well, you can find out right here. This is the license that it is currently under. So it's a little bit difficult to read, but basically there's a EE directory, their enterprise directory. All of that is under the EE license. Everything else is under an MIT license. So if you're not using the EE stuff, it's under MIT. A little weird. Usually I like those two things to be in separate repositories because it keeps the licensing clear. But you know what? I'm going to try not to complain too much. It's pretty cool. It looks nice. It looks clean. I haven't used it, but if you're looking for some OpenTelemetry stuff, so it ties into OpenTelemetry, leverages OpenTelemetry, is built on top of it. It looks pretty cool. So if you're trying to do that and looking for something that you can maybe run yourself, here is an option. Now, obviously this is on top of a already budding expanse of options out there. What I liked about this was it was kind of a one-stop solution. Instead of like, oh, you can wrap 6 tools together, here's a tool. Some pretty dashboards, some pretty logs, some pretty traces, those types of things. So it looks cool. It looks promising. Now, all of us love Serde. All of us love, and Serde is how you pronounce SERDE. I'm not going to hear anything else about it. All of us love Serde, but Serde has a problem that it can be pretty expensive if you do large objects. a new, I don't know if it's new. I saw it recently. I think it's Surdy is pretty new. Is EPSurdy, which is a almost zero copy serialization and deserialization framework that's kind of based off of our favorite Surdy. It's pretty new still, so I'm not sure that I'm going to use this in any new project right now, but I am excited about it. Do you guys want links to this? I'm sorry, I did not link to Signaws. Here's Signaws. I would love to know your thoughts on it, Russell. I want to check it out as well at some point. Yeah, I'd love to check it out at some point. Or like check it out closer. I went through their stuff. I haven't run it myself. Sometimes the finer details is actually running it yourself, like getting dirty with it. There's something to be said about getting dirty with a framework where like the true joys of using a platform is when you don't have to worry about using it. You know what I mean? Like when you're in a platform where you have to constantly configure, reconfigure, or fiddle with, that's not really an enjoyable. The really enjoyable ones was like K0s. I can't tell you how awesome it was that I upgraded my 1-year-old Kubernetes cluster on bare metal, five Kubernetes versions, and everything just worked. I can't tell you how nice that was, because that was fantastic. Is lightning fast better than blazingly fast? Your speed scales, yeah. So everybody knows that lightning is very, very fast and is faster than blazingly fast. It is actually that's the speed scale. Blazingly fast is right before lightning fast. Lightning strikes very quickly. You know, it's what, 20 times in that one flash? Lightningly fast is very, very fast. Not quantumly fast. Quantumly fast is beyond lightning fast. So quantumly fast is basically instantaneously. Then there's lightning. Then there's blazingly fast. And then we'll work on the speed scale, and we'll get this on a t-shirt. That's not what you guys need from the news. Let's continue with the open source. All right. Linkerd. Everybody loves Istio, but some people like Linkerd. Linkerd has come out with a new release with 2.14, and I actually think it brings huge improvements. This is why we're going to talk about it. And this is the flat network multi-cluster. This is something that if you had wanted to do previously, you really needed Istio to do it well. Before Linkerd 110, I believe, you couldn't do it at all. And in 110, they kind of had this crappy way of doing it that didn't work very well. I don't mean that offensively. Like, it's a hard problem to solve. It was just not solved well. It worked if you needed to use it, but it just wasn't solved well. And I love Linkerd, by the way. I think they do some really great work making service meshes accessible. But anyways, in this new flat networking multi-cluster flat networking, it removes this extra step and allows you to have multi-clusters in kind of almost a transparent way, providing the network in between them through MTLS connections. I think that this is fantastic. I'm actually really excited about this. They obviously had gateway API improvements and things like that, and other improvements to Linkerd, but this brought one of the things, you know, I've always said, like, don't use Istio unless if you need to, and then you kind of need to. And this was one of those things that if you wanted to do this, it was kind of like, well, then you need to. And now there's another choice in the ball game, in the selection, if you need to do this. If multi-cluster is something you need to do, well, now there's two choices. I still wouldn't use either of these unless if you needed to, but that's you at least have a choice now. It used to be, if you needed to do this, use Istio. All right, open sourcing Ferrocene. I am excited about this. This is awesome. It's not something I'm going to use. It's not something you're going to be using, but it's released in open source as Apache 2 or MIT, and it's something that is pretty awesome. Ferrocene is a Rust compiler, just like Rust C, but quality managed and qualified to use in automotive and industrial environments, currently by the ISO 26262 and the IEC 61508. So this is a downstream of the Rust compiler, and what this means is there are highly regulated environments like car auto manufacturing and not just the manufacturing systems, that's what the industrial environments, but also in like cars that you could drive, in what is allowed to be there and how those compilers work. So this is opening up a compiler for these ecosystems. So if you're in these ecosystems, it opens up the ability to use Rust. And they've open sourced it for other auto manufacturers or hardware manufacturers to use. I'm very excited about this, and it's bringing Rust to more ecosystems that they can use. And these are actually ecosystems I think could use Rust. Like, yeah. Anyways, pretty cool. I'm excited about it. So because I'm excited about it, I thought you guys should know about it, because obviously that's the scale we work on. Pipewire is another thing that I have been leveraging, and it has a 1.0 release candidate. Now I've been using Pipewire. It's pretty stable without the 1.0 release. It's been out there, and it works. I'm excited that it's getting to this. There's things that are coming out with it. Nothing that I personally need except for bug fixes and improvements, but I'm pretty awesome about it. It's going 1.0. This is a release candidate. It's not 1.0 yet, but I am very excited about it because this kind of takes a legacy system that's been around for a while and makes a pretty awesome system. I've actually been thinking about doing a Mighty Mini Monday on Pipewire. I don't think engineers really need to know about Pipewire, except if you use Linux. It's really nice. It does a lot of stuff with audio and has allowed me to do a lot of stuff for like stream. That's actually how I got where my computer can share its audio now. It's pretty fantastic. In the other releases, we have a new release of Rust. Rust 173 is out, and it brings some general improvements. Now, they have mostly improvements. We can talk about Cilium. How are you doing, Nighthound? All right, so Rust this is not the biggest release, but it does bring some really nice things around panic handlers. So originally, these panic handlers wouldn't actually format very readably as you would do that, as it would kind of put your "oh no, file not found" inside of the panicked at thing, just like this. And now, whenever you panic and emit a panic like this, it actually puts your comment, your words, on a new line. So it separates the things out instead of doing this, making it a little bit easier to read when you have a panic. And this goes to actually asserts as well. So basically, they just cleaned up all of these things and made them a little bit easier. Now, the other major thing here that they did was the thread local initialization. I haven't used this, but it looks like it's going to make some things a little cleaner. Now, I say it looks like they make some things cleaner. It kind of makes some things magical. So take this as an example. You could do things like this. Sorry, I used the word things. And you're going to be able to do it like this now. The same with this. And it makes things look a lot nicer and neater. But I don't know if this is good. This was explicit, and this is kind of magical now. Because the compiler understands basically that you want to do this, and it does this. I had the same thing with Rust, the 2018 one, where they made it where you didn't have to do explicit lifetimes if the compiler could figure out what the lifetimes were. And the problem with this, it's both a good thing and a bad thing. Because the problem with this is now it becomes, When do you have to do it, and when does the compiler just deal with it? And for new people, the compiler just deals with it most of the time. And then when you do run into a time that it can't deal with it, and it can't just assume that, this is what you're wanting to do, it becomes a little bit more, I don't know, a little more magical. But for those that do understand, it's really nice. I'd be interested to see to see if you can show us more advanced uses with streaming audio, such as. Okay, yeah, that would be awesome. Absolutely. I'll work on a Pipewire. I'm not going to promise it anytime soon, but I'll work on a Pipewire. Yeah, this makes sense. It really does make sense. I agree, and I think it's going to make Rust a little bit easier to use. And this is just making. Honestly, this is just. It has no API effect. There's nothing you need to do. It just is going to make. You're going to notice that your Rust asserts and panics are easier to read. That's all. Pretty good. All right. Some people were confused on the internet. About why the Linux Foundation adopted. Can you guys hear that? That's my phone. 1 second. Sorry, the wife is traveling. Had to make sure it wasn't her. All right. So some people were confused because of the release of OpenPubKey, because it seems like SigStore. OpenPubKey seems like SigStore, but the thing is, it's not. It's like it. It's like, I would say, a sibling. So OpenPubKey is actually done with Bastion Zero and Docker, and is basically the OpenIDC version of SigStore, kind of. That's my simplified take on it. I have actually started working on a document to actually cover this in depth on my YouTube channel. I'm going to make a video covering the differences and why it kind of makes sense that both exist. Yes, it not kind of, it does. So anyways, this OpenPubKey augments OpenID Connect to enable workloads and users to sign artifacts under their OpenID identity. So you can kind of think of this as like one layer higher than SigStore is effectively how it's going to be. Now, I do agree that I think the Linux Foundation should have done a better job themselves in helping people understand why this was a thing when they just tried to get everybody on SigStore, and people spent a lot of time getting on SigStore to have this other thing come out that seemed like SigStore. Linux Foundation, if you want to contact me to help you do these types of things, this educational content to be released with it, I'd be happy to work with you to do that, because I think it's important, because I saw a ton of confusion. Yeah. Anyways, here is the repo for it. You guys know me. I love supply chain security, and I think SigStore as well as OpenPubKey are huge steps in helping with that. So, I like to see the projects happening and the innovation happening there for this. So yeah. All right. Last thing here in open source is event-driven declarative orchestrator Kestra. So Kestra was released. It's written in Java. We're going to have to give them a pass because at least they use Vue instead of React. So they have one good thing going for them. But it is written in Java. But it looks interesting. Now, it says declarative orchestrator, and it's hard to understand what they orchestrate. There's a lot of orchestrators. Kubernetes is an orchestrator of containers. Kubeflow is an orchestrator of machine learning pipelines. Kubeflow is not Kubeflow, but MLflow is an orchestrator of machine learning. So when you say declarative orchestrator, I wish that they would put a little bit. I had to go digging for this, but it's actually pretty cool. So this is kind of a orchestrator of workflows and event-driven data, which is pretty interesting to do. Like, you could think of this as almost like a not really as like a nearline solution like Kafka, but if you had scheduled and event-driven workflows, so some people use Argo CD for this, but not Argo CD, but Argo workflows. This is more like an Argo workflow competitor. So if you would use Argo workflow, Kestra is something that could do it. Now, I watched the video. It looks kind of cool with their workflows. So, you know, I'm interested in following along with it. So that, my friends, was the last 2 weeks. I think there was a lot of really cool stuff happening. I'm sorry that I know I said I'm going to try to focus and do a little deeper, and yet we went wide, but it was because there was so much cool stuff that happened the last 2 weeks. And I just had to go wide. Like everything I talked about today, I feel like I could have spent 15 minutes on, and because they're really interesting. Even stuff like Kestra, I'm not going into depth on it. I'm letting you guys know that it's there because I think it's important for you guys. You know, when we're making decisions, we need to know what's out there, and so I like to shed light on letting you guys know these things are out there. But it actually had some pretty cool concepts in its data warehouse and how it handled, you know, event-driven workflows, and how it let you tie into events and things like that and do stuff based off events happening on your network. Those things that Kestra provide are pretty cool. So anyways, that's your news wrapped up. Holy crap. In what was that, an hour and a half? My apologies for making it go so long. I hope that it wasn't too boring, too long, too dry. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys I hope all this this work that I put into bringing and finding and collecting all this information is useful to you guys. So it's like AWS's connections to fire off compute storage. Kind of. We can watch this video. I have Pipewire set up to route the sound to a external little cable to then go to the other computer as an input, which is pretty cool that I could do that through Pipewire so that the streaming computer can do that. But we could watch this video. And you guys could see some of it. Let me put my headphones on. It's only a 3-minute video. It's not too bad.
Processes can be complicated. Kestra simplifies data operations and improves collaboration between engineers.
My goodness, this voiceover dude, I need to meet him.
And business users. By bringing infrastructure as code best practices to data pipelines, Kestra allows you to build reliable workflows and manage them with confidence. The rich ecosystem of plugins helps you seamlessly integrate your existing stack. Using a simple declarative interface, you can ingest and...
Okay, yeah, it's really sales pitchy. But basically, you know, everybody uses declarative nowadays, and unfortunately YAML. But it allows you to define all this stuff in Git, which is pretty cool.
Process data efficiently, regardless of the source system your data is coming from. The embedded plugin documentation in the UI provides a full list of supported integrations. Plugins are grouped by a service provider such as AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud.
So yeah, it allows you to plug in a lot of data ingestion and run with it that way. So it's I don't know. Like I said, it's interesting. I need to get my hands dirty with it first. I feel like this is one of those things like you have to try. And I mean, it is written in Java, but we'll forgive them. We'll forgive their Java-ness. But yeah, it's like connections. but it's meant to be connections with event driven. So basically, like, how I've thought about it so far. Like, I don't know this for certain. I've only dug into it for the last week in my spare time. Is basically like, hey, let's say you have a new user sign up and there's some data with that, their name, their whatnot, and you want to do a workflow with that. You can define that in Git with whatever plugins from whichever cloud provider that you want. And now when that event happens, you have this workflow that you can see here and collaborate with. And so you can share it with other teams and stuff like that. Java devs need, and for all of you, I tease about Java. If you work in Java, it's fine. I don't like the JVM very much. And that's a personal opinion. I have written in Java. I know Java better than I probably should. Every language is horrible in its own way. Horrible in its own way. I tease. It did feel like when I was looking through the stuff that it almost looked like it was trying to say, hey, if you need this and you're not like on AWS, because obviously AWS has something like step functions that does this very well. AWS step functions actually allows you to tie into those events or in the Lambda and whatnot that allow you to do these same workflows on AWS. But they only natively integrate with AWS. So you're very much right, Russell, that this seems like kind of AWS step functions for multi-cloud or just cloud agnostic. I myself have not run it, so I can't tell you where it would be good to run. Like I said, sometimes the real truth is in how it's run. How easy is it to run? It's just like also with the logging, the new logging with Signaws. Is this better to run than like hobbling together your own stack? I can't promise it. I haven't tried it before. And you almost need to like run it in production before you know how bad it is to run in production. I don't know if that makes sense, but like some things just run in production and other things they run in production. That's the best way I can explain it. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. But I find these things, and I find that they are things that we've all dealt with. Like, event-driven workflows for data and logs and tracing and stuff. And I wanted to shout out these projects. So in case people, it's always like you only know what you know. And if you never knew the project existed, would you know to try to use it? And that's why I would try to give them the shout out in this open source section. So if you have an open source project you'd like to have as a shout out in this, let me know. I'd love to cover it. I'd love to cover open source project in like Mighty Mini Mondays as well. So if you're looking to help solve problems engineers have, please let me know. I've seen other things that usually class themselves as a multiplexer and use only one data source to ingest from. Oh, interesting. Maybe we should do a comparison of all these. I love that voiceover guy, though. That guy has a fantastic voice. I have not used those. I am going to put them on my to look at. Maybe I'll give them a shout out next week. I mean, I know what Gollum is. Oh wait, Gollum is wiki, right? I do know what Gollum is. Cool. Awesome. Oh, you're talking about a different golem. There is a wiki golem though. There is. I promise. I think it is, right? Isn't golem? I could be wrong. I will have to look it up. I'll have to look it up. But I think there is a wiki that's like a markdown wiki something. Anyways, that's it for the news today. I hope there's even a golem game. Oh gosh. Well, that's it for my news today. I know I didn't go deep today, but my plan is to go more in depth on topics as we don't have so many. But this week, the last 2 weeks, there was a lot to cover. Google was killing a lot of services. I had to cover all of that. So hopefully next week we get to go in depth on a little bit more. Yeah. So anyways, thank you all for joining. I hope that this is informative and that you enjoy it. And yeah, that I'll see you guys next week. Have a fantastic